Hi everyone, I wanted to take some time to go over the final paper. I know we're hitting the midpoint of the semester, and I know I do have some folks who like getting ahead when it comes to their assignments, and that way they can take some time over the next few weeks to get it done versus waiting till the last minute. I am a guilty of being a very bad procrastinator, so I was everybody, even my professors, knew me as being the guy that did everything at the last minute, for better or for worse. But for those folks who aren't like me, I wanted to give you all some advice on this final paper. So if you look at the outline I put up on Blackboard, I think that'd be really helpful in terms of kind of setting a template for you for how you want to write this paper. So we have the introduction. There I explained to you all that's where you introduce the problem that you're trying to address or solve, or whatever the main issue is at hand. You should be doing what you can to lay some foundational information for your reader. You should also provide your specific angle to the problem. What is your research question? What is your hypothesis? Again, you might not have both of those. And that will depend on how you construct your project. And then the last part of your introduction is previewing the rest of the paper. Essentially, when you're writing a paper in academia, I like telling folks that what you're essentially doing is taking the reader by the hand and leading them along the entire way. Very much, I take a very similar approach to when I used to teach public speaking. I would tell students the same thing, right? You do your introduction, and then you let the audience know, okay, now that I've established this, the first thing I want to talk about is this topic, and then you get into that. You should be doing the same thing. As you finish your introduction, you say, okay, up next I'm going to have my literature review, where I go over some of the main foundational pieces that set up this topic, as well as some of the current research that's going on. I will then lead into my methodology, where I'm going to explain what my approach is going to be and what tools I'll be using. And then lastly, I will have the anticipated results. But first, let me go ahead and go over the literature around my topic. Now, again, this is me just kind of doing it on the fly. You want to make sure it's a little bit more better constructed than that, and more formal. But that said, I don't want you to feel this pressure for it to be too formal. I know making that jump from maybe the typical writing that you do on an everyday basis to academic writing can be difficult. My suggestion is start with your literature review. And I don't mean that just for your paper, but I mean in just getting an idea for academic writing. There's no better way of understanding it or knowing what it looks like than by reading it. Use the video that I put up in the resources folder, where I explain how to reach the UTEP library databases to start looking for articles about your topic. From there, because essentially what the literature review, which is probably the biggest brunt of your paper, and it's typically that way for a lot of academics when it comes to writing articles, because that research or that literature review really sets up why your research is necessary, your project is necessary, and why it provides value to the field. Because I think of it as, or someone explained it to me this way a long time ago, is when you get to a party at some point, right? You walk in, you see your friends, and you start the conversation wherever that conversation may be. However, that conversation started well before you got there, right? Your friends may have been talking about a number of things, and as the conversation goes on, once you get there, they might reference some of the things they talked about earlier, and they're going to have to get you up to speed on what was said before. You're going to have to do the same thing when it comes to your literature review, right? You are entering that subject or that field or that discipline in a particular moment, but you have to explain kind of the things that went before you. What are some of the foundational pieces that set up that conversation? Then you also then have to address some of the contemporary things that are going on, right? Okay, if you're talking about nonverbal communication, then you start talking about some of the ways that people are addressing it now, right? Maybe people are looking at, especially with the way the last year has been, how is nonverbal communication affected by online learning or Zoom or any of those things, right? See what other people have been doing with that. And then you find your niche. Okay, now that we've seen all, what's been done in the past, what's currently going on, there is no one really talking about this. And that's where you say, okay, but this is what I'm addressing in my project. These are the questions that I'm going to answer, and this is why essentially this project is needed. And that's the point of your literature review, is going over all of the necessary things that you think build a foundation for your project, both historically and both current, so you can explain why it fits within this field or this discipline, but also answering questions that haven't been really answered before. So when it comes to your sources, basically all of them should be in your literature review. You might have some that you have to reference for your methodology to kind of justify why you think that approach or those tools fit for your project, but the majority of them are going to be in your literature review. So, so going back to the outline in your literature review, you use the first part of your paper to cite scholars and research that came before you and that are integral to the problem at hand, and use the second half of the paper to cite more current research that lends itself in justifying your project. Next, we have the methodology, right? So there you explain what approach you'll be using, as well as the method. So I think we've done a pretty good job over the last week or so going over the difference between quantitative and qualitative. So just really explain to the reader why you think your approach is best. From there, you explain what tools you're going to be using based on the approach that you're using, right? So if it's qualitative, you might be doing an interview or a focus group, or you might be doing an ethnography of some kind. If you're doing a quantitative analysis, you might be doing surveys, and really justify kind of what tools you'll be using. And if you're doing a qualitative analysis, the other approach that might be easier for a lot of folks, that at least in the past, some of my students have really preferred a textual analysis. And I'll make sure that in the next coming week or so, I have a video specifically for textual analysis so you understand what that approach is like, because I think it might be a little bit easier for folks to use that approach given the timeline that we have in this course. But that's very much a qualitative analysis where you are looking at a particular text, and text is kind of like the academic way that we look at, or the term that we use when we're looking at, like, let's say movies or TV shows or a speech, like a political speech, something along those lines, where you are analyzing the different words and phrases that are being used, the themes that are being used. So that's something that you could do too, and you explain that in your methodology. Last part, instead of having a conclusion, you have what's called the anticipated results section, right? So you explain what you think is going to happen and why. This is your project, so you can make your own assumption as to what might be proven, disproven, or shown through the data. Lastly, address what some of your limitations or the limits of your project are. For example, if you have decided you are not a numbers person, will be doing a qualitative study, you may be using research tools like an interview or an ethnography. If you're only going to interview 10 people, explain that there's a limit to your project, right? That's a particular limit that you have, whereas a different study might benefit from having, instead of doing an interview of 10 people, doing a survey to 150 people. But that's just some of the ways that you can explain some of the limitations of what other studies might benefit from in the future. But the fact that that's not the scope of your project, that you're really focused on what you've just explained to your reader. So that's basically it. I mean, I know this is at least from the other students that I've talked to, this can be one of the more daunting papers, because it's not like some of the other classes where you've been going over a lot of concepts and theories that are easy to apply to general life. This is definitely the most, I don't know the right phrase for it, but this definitely feels like the most graduate level paper in terms of like research and analytic heavy, or theory heavy. So I understand that it might be difficult, but please don't get overwhelmed by this paper. I really do think, like I said, the textual analysis video will be really helpful in terms of if that's something that you all might want to do. I'm going to continue putting resources into the resource folder on Blackboard. Anything that I think will be helpful, articles that I think will be helpful. I will say, when it comes to your literature review, that you don't have to necessarily be reading every single article that you pull up, right? Look at the abstract and see if it even fits for what you're doing. If it doesn't fit, then move on to the next one. If it does fit, then really just try to pick apart and find the pieces that really help either justify the foundation for that field that you're studying, and or set up for what's currently being done in the field. So those are some suggestions for you all. Again, I think if you fill out that outline and then start kind of, filling in the gaps from there, I think that you'll be well on your way on finishing that paper. But we have a few weeks left to go. If you have any questions, if you need to set up some time, I know I've said this many times before, but if the office hours that I have don't fit with your schedule, please don't hesitate to reach out to me so we can figure out a time that works best.